Hello everybody, how's it going? My name is Sergio and welcome to a new Unity tutorial. In this second part of the Unity shooting tutorial, we will be casting some Raycasts, learning how to deal damage to the enemies that are in the way of the Raycasts, and modifying the bullets a little bit so that it fits better the new mechanics. I apologize for not having uploaded anything in the last month. I've taken the August month as my vacation for the summer, and I had many side projects to do as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started making this. So the first thing we're gonna need to do is some kind of enemy to actually shoot at. So let's right click in the hierarchy panel and we're gonna say create empty, and we're gonna name this enemy. And before we start, remind you guys that you have a link down below in the description with all the assets I'm using. It's a Unity package. All you have to do is with a new project, a blank project open in Unity, you can just double click on the Unity package, import everything, and then go to the scene folder and open the soldier folder. Perfect. So with that out of the way, let's navigate to the sprite dummy folder, and I have created this little dummy training sprite. We're gonna add to the enemy game object, we're gonna add a component that is gonna be a sprite renderer. So let's add that in and then drag the dummy sprite onto it. Awesome. Now let's move that game object a little bit out of the way. So there's a few things that we're gonna do with this dummy. The first one is we're gonna create a script that is gonna take into account health, and it's gonna take away health from the dummy, make it die, and we're also gonna be applying some forces to this dummy so that I can show you guys how you can also use Raycasts to apply forces to whatever enemy or whatever object you're hitting. So let's go ahead and add a component. We're gonna need a rigid body to do so that we can apply physics onto it, and we're gonna need a box collider so that the dummy doesn't just fall through the ground or anything. So let's click on this edit bounding volume, the edit collider button, and we're gonna move the sides of the collider to about the shoulders of the dummy. And then I'm gonna move the bottom part a little bit so that it fits better the base. And perfect. So now let's go to the soldier game object, and we're gonna be modifying the player shoot script that we created in the last episode. So we're gonna go ahead and double click on the player shoot script. That is gonna open up Visual Studio, and I have finally remembered to zoom in so that those of you who are on mobile, can see these a little bit better. So here, if you remember, we have the shoot function that gets called whenever we click the left mouse button. We have the fire pause vector 2, which is the position of the weapon tip. We have the variable dir, which is the direction, and we're gonna use those for the Raycast. So I'm gonna put all the Raycast mechanics in a new function that is gonna return void, and it's gonna be called shoot ray. And we're gonna pass two parameters, the first one being the vector 2, being the origin, and we're gonna say vector 2 direction as well. So for those of you who don't know what a Raycast really is, a Raycast is basically a laser beam that gets fired from the origin, in this case this vector 2 position, and it has a direction, it has a distance, and that laser beam collects information about the game objects that is hitting along the way. We store all of that information inside of a type of variable that is, and the type is Raycast hit 2D in the case of 2D. In the case of 3D games, that's gonna be Raycast hit, if I'm not mistaken. So let's create a Raycast hit 2D variable, and we're gonna call it hit. Now, these mechanics for the Raycasts are a little bit different in 2D games than it is for 3D games, so you're probably not going to be able to just translate this into a 3D game. To the hit variable, we're going to pass a physics2d.raycast, so we're going to do a Raycast, and the Raycast function takes an origin, which in this case we're passing as a parameter, so we'll just say origin, the same for the direction, and then the distance, we're just going to use the range variable that, if you remember, we declared up here, and that is the range of our weapon, so that's how we actually use that range. So there it goes. And then we can also pass a layer mask. If you remember, we have a little public layer mask what to hit variable up here defined. And a layer mask is basically a variable that has different layers into it. And that's those are the layers in which the Raycast is going to have effect. So we're going to pass what to hit variable as the layer mask. So now, just to check if this is working, we're gonna just debug this to the console. And the way this is usually done is we say if hit, the hit variable, dot collider, because the hit variable has a collider property into it. We're going to say if this is not null, that means that we have hit a game object that has a collider attached to it. And we're going to say debug.log and we are gonna say we have hit something. Perfect. Now all we need to do is to call this variable from the shoot function. So we're gonna say shoot ray, and we're gonna pass fire pause as the origin, and then there as the direction. Awesome. So let's save that. Let's go back into Unity and let's hit play. Okay, awesome. So now if we do this, you'll see in the console that nothing appears. That's because you might have to reset the what to hit variable to everything. And there it goes. So since the dummy has a collider attached to it, we get the message we have hit something. Cool. So now we can get out of... Cool. So now we can go ahead and start putting some mechanics here so that we can deal damage to the dummy. So first of all, we need the enemy, in this case the dummy, to have some kind of health. So we need a script that is going to take all of these mechanics and put them into play. So we're going to just hit add component. There it goes. And we're going to call... I'm going to call this dummy health. You can call it whatever you want. Let's open that up in Visual Studio. And we're just gonna, this is gonna be a really simple script. We're not gonna need the update function. And let's just say public float base health. This is gonna be the base health of the dummy. We're gonna set it to 100. And then we're gonna say float current health. And I'm gonna serialize this field so that we can see it in the inspector. And then we're gonna say in the start, we're gonna say current health. So just copy and paste equals base health. And that will set the current health of the dummy to whatever value that variable has, right? And then we need a function that is going to be called from the player should script that is going to subtract some health from the dummy. And we're going to call this damage. So it's going to be a public function that is going to return void, and it's going to be called damage. And we're going to pass a float called damage. And that will be whatever amount of damage we want to deal to the dummy. In this case, we're going to say current health minus equals damage. And then we're going to check if current health is below or equal to 0, then we want to kill the dummy. So I'm going to go ahead and create another function. It's going to be void, and it's going to be called die. And in this function, we're just going to destroy the dummy. Let's just say debug.log, and we're going to say the dummy just died. And then we're gonna set current health back to base health. Okay, that way we don't have to be spawning them back or anything. And in here we're just gonna say whenever that reaches 0, we're gonna make the dummy die. Okay, perfect. So now we need to go into the player should script again, and inside of this where we had the debug.log, we're gonna actually put some logic. So we're gonna say hit.collider, and then we want to access the game object property in the, so that's the game object attached to that collider, and we're gonna say get component dummy health dot damage. So we execute the damage function, and we're going to pass the damage variable as the parameter. Remember up here we had a public float damage, it's 25, and since the dummy has 100 as the health, then that means that it should take us 4 hits to kill it. Okay, so I've just realized that since we changed the layer mask in play mode, it would not... yeah, it resets, as you can see, so let's just change that back to everything. Let's hit play again. Dumb mistake right there. So there it goes. We have hit something, we have hit something, we have hit something, and the dummy just died. So now let's go ahead and put that layer mask that we have created into play. Let's go to the enemy game object, and let's, on the up right, you can see layer. It's on default right now. We're gonna add a new layer that is gonna be enemies, actually, in case you have more than one. Enemies. There it goes. And now let's go back to the enemy. Let's change the layer to enemies. And now in the soldier, let's change what to hit to. First nothing, and then just select enemies. So now only the game objects that are on the enemies layer will be affected by this raycast. So if I duplicate this dummy and I change its layer to default and I hit play, you'll see that he's not affected by the damage. So here we kill the dummy, as you can see right here. Now let me clear it. We hit it. This one, we don't hit it, okay? Awesome. So that's useful because you may have, in this case, I'm just using the dummy, but you may have some objects in the scene that you don't really want to be raycasting onto. That's why you may use a layer mask, or For example, if you have some, let's say you have created some allies for the soldier and you don't want them to take damage or whatever function, or you want to be able to activate friendly fire and stuff like that, that allows you to just ignore those game objects, okay? So we need to, we're gonna do a few more checks in here. We're gonna say, in case you have more than one enemy, let's first erase this. In case you have more than one enemy, you may want to differentiate the type of enemies you have. We can do this by using tags. So a tag is basically like a name that is not really a name, is a way to differentiate types of objects. In this case, we're gonna add a tag and we're gonna say, instead of having here enemies, we're gonna say dummies, right? And so I'm gonna tag all of these enemies that I have as dummies. I'm gonna tag them as a tag here. There you go. And we're gonna say dummies. So here we have the dummies tag. So we're just gonna apply that in there, and we're gonna say if hit.collider.tag equals dummies, or was it dummies? Yeah, dummies. Then we want to go ahead and execute this piece of code, right? And we're gonna also say debug.log we have hit a dummy. And else we're just gonna say we have hit something else, right? So to demonstrate this, I'm gonna duplicate once again this enemy, this dummy right here, and I'm gonna change this to, I don't know, game controller, for example, or I'm just gonna say, let's just say respawn, whatever, doesn't really matter, it's just to show you what happens. So here we hit this guy, we have hit a dummy, we have hit something else, okay? Perfect. So now we need to add some forces to this dummy. As I said, we want to apply some forces so that whenever we hit it with a bullet, it kind of like tilts over, right? We're gonna go into the player should script again, and we're gonna say inside of this dummy logic. So I'm just gonna say dummy damage logic. And in here, we're gonna add a new line, which is gonna be if hit.collider. It has to be collider.gameObject.getComponent rigid body 2D. So here, and this does not equal null. So here we're just checking if it has. So we can say it has a rigid body 2D, right? That way we're not trying to add forces to something that doesn't have a rigid body 2D. And we don't get errors, right? So here we're just gonna say hit collider get component the rigid body, and we're gonna say add force, and here we have to pass a vector to force. Now a very easy way to do this is by using normals. The normal is the direction pointing away from the collider the raycast hits. The normal is a vector that is normalized, meaning that it has a magnitude of 1. This can be used to calculate things like reflections. So we just invert that way we can apply a force in the same direction of the bullet, and we're gonna multiply that by a variable that we're gonna call hit force, and we're just gonna declare this variable up here. It's gonna be a public float hit force, and we're gonna set that to 400 just so that we can test it out. Okay. And so now let's go ahead and test that out. Let's go back into the Unity editor. Let's hit play. There it goes. So now, boom, we hit it and it tilts over. Now we can't hit him anymore because, well, he's tilted over. As I said, in this game, it's not going to make a lot of sense. But now you know how to do it. Now let's go ahead and change a few things because you may have noticed. Let me show that again in case you missed it. When we shoot, those bullets just go straight through, and we actually just lost our dummy. I have tested a few different ways to make this work. If you remember, we are moving the bullet with the bullet movement script, which basically simply translates the game object position, and it's just moving the game object to infinity. Well, the problem with this is that since the speed of the game object is so high, the precision of the collision system is not good enough. So basically, as I was testing it, I would shoot the bullet, I would put some kind of collider on it. I would just say whenever the collider collides with the enemy, just destroy the game object, but it wasn't fast enough, so the bullet would actually get destroyed after a few seconds or a few inches after it hit the enemy, which just looks bad. So we're gonna do this in a different way. We're actually not gonna be even needing this bullet movement script anymore. All we're gonna do is, first of all, let's go to the prefabs folder and let's drag a bullet prefab here so that we can take a look. We have a line renderer and we have the bullet movement script. First of all, let's just remove this script. We don't need it. Second of all, you may notice, well, you should notice that we have a positions variable in here, which is just an array of vector 3s. If I stretch this out, you see that the bullet changes, okay? We're gonna use these values to draw a bullet from the weapon tip to the dummy whenever it hits it, or otherwise it's just gonna go all the way to the range. And we're just gonna show that for a few frames so that it creates an effect of movement. Now, this may sound a little crappy and cheap, but when we do this, you'll see that it's actually pretty good. First of all, we are gonna need to get a reference to this line renderer. And how do we do that? Well, let's go back to our player shoot script, and inside of the draw bullet, you will notice we have quaternion rotation. Here we're saying the rotation to instantiate the bullet prefab and just let it go. Now, since we're not going to be moving the game object anymore, we don't need this. We can just delete that. And here we just have instantiate. So, well, first of all, let's change that. The rotation, since it's not defined anymore, we're just going to say quaternion.identity. And quaternion identity is basically just setting the identity rotation of the game object. And the cool thing about this instantiate function is that it returns a game object. As you can see right here on just below the mouse cursor, you see it says game object, and then it says object.instantiate. That value that says on the left, that's what it returns. Since it returns a game object, that's basically a reference to the game object that has been instantiated. And we can use that to draw the bullet to whatever we have hit. This may not make sense right now, but just follow along. We're gonna say game object bullet equals the bullet that we just instantiated. And first of all, let's just, let's not destroy it right away so that we can see better what's going on. So once we have spawned this bullet, we need to get a reference to the line renderer. So we're just going to create a line renderer variable, which is going to be line. And we're going to say bullet.getComponent line renderer. Okay. With that reference, we can now go ahead and say if line does not equal null, so basically if there's an actual line renderer in there, then we want to change the positions, the starting position, as well as the second position of the bullet line, right? So we're gonna say line.setPosition right there, and we're gonna say the index of the position, 0 is the starting position of the bullet, and then we pass whatever position we want to set it to. In this case, we're gonna say weapon tip.position. Now, there's a little issue with this. Weapon tip.position is the position of the transform in world space. And if you remember over here in the line render, we're not using world space. We need to check that so that it actually instantiates it at the actual position. Otherwise, it will do on the local transform of the player. So we're gonna say, with that done, we can copy this line below. And now we want to change the end position. And what's the end position going to be? Well, that's a position which we're gonna be passing to the draw bullet function. And it's gonna be a vector 2. Okay, so how do we get this hit position? We have to somehow get the point in world space where we have hit that collider. The hit variable has a nice property called hit.point that we're gonna use, and that is the point in world space where we have hit that collider. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and say up here we're gonna create a new vector2 variable, which is gonna be hit pos, just so that we don't lose ourselves with names. We're gonna say down below here, if hit.collider does not equal null, then set hit pos, right, to the position. So we're gonna say hit pos equals hit.point. Now, we don't care if we have hit an enemy or if we have hit I don't know, a rock, doesn't matter. All we know is that that is the spot where there's a collider and we want the bullet to stop there. It's not gonna go through it. There's ways to go around that if that's something you need, But right now, well, for example, this hit variable, if you hit a rock and that rock is not in a layer marked by what to hit, then it will be ignored. If the rock is not on whatever layer that this includes, then the bullet is gonna go straight through that rock. That might be useful if you want to set up a mechanic where you can shoot through a door or stuff like that. Then you would need to do something like this. Okay, but what if it doesn't hit anything? What happens to the bullet? Well, we're gonna say else. So basically, if we have not hit a collider, then we're gonna create a float called x value, okay? And this is gonna be dependent on whether or not we're facing right or left. So remember, this is a one-line if statement. It's the condition between parentheses followed by a question mark, and then the first value will be applied if this condition is met. So if it's true, then is this, and we want to say vector2 dot right. Otherwise, we want it to be vector2 dot left. Okay, awesome. Oh, my bad. Actually, it has to be point right dot x. We want the x value only. Now, we're gonna say hit pause then is gonna be equal to a new vector2, where x val is gonna be the x position, and we're gonna multiply that by the range, and then we want this the y value is gonna be the origin. So origin dot y, the origin, in this case the weapon tip. So now that we have set hit position, we actually need to call the function. So we're gonna change this. So first we were calling it from the shoot function. Since now we're passing some values to this draw bullet, we need to call it down here. So whether or not we have hit something, we want to draw a bullet because we're shooting. And we're gonna pass hit pause as the second point, whatever that may be. As I forgot to remove the bullet movement script from the actual prefab. Whoops. Okay, so go to the prefabs folder, bullet prefab, and delete that script. Since that, we need to check use world space. Now, there it goes. You can see that we're shooting. If we hit the dummy, then it just stops whatever the dummy was. If it doesn't, it just goes to infinity. But now they're just suspended in the air. Okay, well, let's go ahead and just destroy the bullet after a little bit of time. So whenever we do all of this, we want to say destroy. And this is a little nice tip. Remember, in the bullet movement, we were doing, let me see if I can pull it up over here so that I can show you guys scripts, bullet, there it goes, bullet movement. We're starting a coroutine auto destroy where we pass the flow time. Well, that's not needed. There's actually a subscriber left a comment telling me that there's a better way. Here, the destroy function, as you can see, you pass an object and you can also pass a float, which is the amount of time in which it will be destroyed. So we're gonna say we want to destroy the bullet after 0.04, for example. That is very little time, but you'll see that it creates a nice effect. So here, okay, as you can see, it creates a nice effect. I mean, it does look as if the bullet was actually just like traveling. That was it for this tutorial. I hope you liked it. I will be uploading more tutorials now more frequently. Yeah, I just hope you liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Leave in the comments any questions you may have, if you had any problems with it or anything, or if you have any suggestions for future tutorials. I would also love to hear that, as well as subscribe if you haven't already and you want to see more stuff like this. And I'll see you guys in the next one.